Pen. So, good morning everyone. Now, when we were discussing modern Indian history, we had stopped where? 1945?
1943, grade 1 or family.
Okay. And we had talked about INA and everything?
The last one was these were the reasons for the failure of Wavell.
Failure of the Wavell.
These were the reasons for the failure.
So, I'll just do a brief recap of what we have done till now. And then okay. So, yes, we'll first do a recap of what we have done till now. And then, because it's been some time that we discussed. So, देखिए, in the 1940s to the 1945 period, we had seen a number of things happening. We had in fact broadly seen that after 1937 elections, and more importantly after 1937 elections, in which the Congress demonstrated what? Its popularity, right? The Congress demonstrated its popularity in the 1937 elections. Demonstrated its popularity in the 1937 elections. And Congress won the elections in 1937 and formed ministries in a number of provinces. Yes? Including the Bombay province. Then I told you that for 28 months it was Congress who ruled in a number of provinces on the basis of the Government of India Act 1935. Yes? Now, since then, ultimately in 1939 what began? World War II. World War II began, and then Congress debated what must be its response. And there is what we discussed with the Gandhi and the Bose debates, and which eventually resulted in Congress taking the position on the Wardha scheme of, the Wardha session of the Congress. And the Wardha session of the Congress said that Congress would grant only support when certain conditions are fulfilled. That there must be a genuine devolution of power before or immediately, and after the war, the British must agree to set up a constituent assembly for a complete transfer of power. Then we discussed that in 1940, even the Muslim League came up with its own resolution. That was the Pakistan Day resolution at Lahore. Yes? And it was in this Pakistan Day resolution that the Muslim League basically demanded for the first time gave a concrete proposal of a separate province for Muslim majority areas in northwest and east, right? Eventually, what you see is that for the first time the British came up with their proposal, and that was the August offer. And the August offer came as the British started, and British and the Allies were losing in World War II. I told you that 1939 to 1942, it is the Allies who were losing in World War II. And the result was the August offer, in which there was a call given for dominion status. The British proposed dominion status, but the Congress said no, dominion status is not enough. And the Congress launched individual satyagrahas. And following these individual satyagrahas, the British came up with their own next proposal, and that was the which? What? Cripps mission. And it is this Cripps mission which again repeated the idea of dominion status, and also while they said that the Constituent Assembly will be composed mainly of Indians, they said it would be composed only of Indians. and also it proposed a dominion status. It also said something problematic that Nehru found essentially problematic was indirectly it granted a right to what? Secession. Remember that those provinces which formed it to form a union of their own could secede and form a union of their own. So that is why the Cripps mission ultimately is also rejected by the Congress, which results in the Quit India movement. Yes, that is also happening in 1942. And in 1942, we also discussed the formation of INA. And where Mohan Singh proposed the formation of INA, and then it is Bose who soon assumed a leadership position in INA in 1943, which INA took part with Japan in the Battle of Kohima, right? Also, Bose declared the formation of a provisional Indian government in where? Singapore. ये सारी कहानी हम बता चुके हैं, right? Ultimately, when the Japanese started losing, when Japan lost, you see, when Japan lost, that is the time when you see that INA soldiers are being imprisoned and then being put on INA trials, right? In 1944, they're being put on INA trials in 1945, and it is in these INA trials that Congress took up their cases. Ultimately, the dissatisfaction with the INA trials amongst soldiers led to the Royal Indian Navy mutiny, right? And following the INA trials and the Rin mutiny, the British were concerned that their hold over India was declining, and their hold even over the army was declining. The result was what? That the British came up with the next proposal, and that is the Cabinet Mission Plan. And we'll talk about the Cabinet Mission Plan onwards today. We have not talked Cabinet Mission Plan. But here, I was also telling you that in 1945, the Muslim League, when World War II got over, Muslim League also strengthened its demands and was more vocal. On the one side, Wavell Plan had been sent. But on the other side, even in 1945, even the Muslim League got more vocal in its demands and started what was called as the Direct Action Plan for Pakistan. Did we talk about the Direct Action Plan? No? Okay, so we'll talk about that also. This is where we had discussed till before. Till 1945 we had discussed, right? Now we're going to talk about the Direct Action Plan, and we're going to talk about the Cabinet Mission Plan here onwards. There's not much to discuss from 1945 to 47. There are a few things that we'll discuss. But beyond that, what we're going to focus today on is communalism, partition, the growth of communalism and partition in India. That is the thing that we're going to focus upon. Okay, because it's not just that we study till 1947. From your mains point of view, you need to know about communalism, religion, and partition, because questions related to that are also asked. Then we can talk also a bit, we have not talked about tribal and peasant movements, right? So we'll talk about that also. देखिए, now let me just give in this setting, or just get this batch of background. See, 1945, what is happening? World War II is, ended. Then came the Wavell Plan, but the Wavell Plan also broke down primarily because the Muslim League argued what? The Muslim League argued in the Wavell Plan that all Muslim representatives in the Constituent Assembly must be its representatives. Whereas the Congress argued that no, even it could appoint Muslim members to the Constituent Assembly. And this is what led to the breakdown of the Wavell Plan. Now, following the breakdown of the Wavell Plan, you see World War II has ended. Now, and also on the one side there are INA trials. The Muslim League did not have anything to do much with the INA trials. Now, it is here, the Direct Action Plan for Pakistan is also launched by the Muslim League. The Muslim League argued what? That now is the time that we will have to leave the path of constitutionalist politics. In the sense that Muslim League under Jinnah had largely followed a different approach. Rather than mass mobilizations before 1940, they are not doing any major mass mobilizations. After 1940, they had started mass mobilizations, and in 1945, as World War II is going to an end, Jinnah is of the opinion that now is the time to press hard and press strongly. So he gives a call for open mass movements demanding Pakistan, that we will get out on the streets and we will not stop till a Pakistan is granted. That is what leads to the direct action plan for Pakistan. It's an open call for mass movement. Now this is happening, and this ultimately also leads to a rise of communal tension and also a number of religious riots in northwest as well as in east. So the direct action plan of Pakistan came. That is also the time when INA trials are happening. That is also the time eventually which was soon followed by the Rind Mutiny. So 1945 end and 1946 beginning, what is happening? There is a lot of political instability. It is in the midst of all of this that the British announced the two things: the coming of the cabinet mission plan, and it is this cabinet mission plan's proposal which you must know from your prelims point of view. And also soon after around the cabinet mission plan, they announced the what? Setting up, after the cabinet mission plan, they announced the setting up of an interim government. And this interim government that they said would be made in charge of administration after some time. Okay, and this because the whole question was what happens once World War II is over. World War II is over now. Now is the time when everybody is expecting something major, some major transfer of power to happen. And everybody is also being more vocal. Everybody, meaning the Congress and the Muslim League, is both are being more vocal in terms of pressing for a substantial devolution. Okay. It is in this, all of this is happening. So just remember the direct path where you were writing, in that itself you write, in that chronological order only, that in 1945, the Muslim League pressed ahead with the Muslim League pressed ahead with a mass movement and moved beyond constitutionalism to make a direct demand for Pakistan, or to make a direct demand for Pakistan. Now, if you remember, and please, I had told you before also, that one of the things that one sees is that once the Rind Mutiny happened, the British realized that their hold over their armed forces was declining, and that is what prompted them to quickly come up with the next proposal, and that is what? The cabinet mission plan. Now, also remember this much. There's something that I told you, and this is something that Manishankar Ayyar also said in his lecture, that, that yes, there is no doubt that there's a lot of contribution of Bose and the INA and the following Rind Mutiny also. But at the same point of time, alone INA and the Rind Mutiny would have meant nothing for the British to suppress. If the British could suppress a much bigger armed uprising in the 1850s, and that too a bigger mutiny, it was much more easier for them to take care of the INA. But situation had changed. Situation had changed in the past 100 years. The 1857 mutiny was a much bigger mutiny. But what had changed by 1940s was the emergence of a nationalist sentiment, and also the weakening of the British by World War I and World War II. the military and economic weakening of British by World War I and II. So it's not that Subhash Chandra Bose, 15,000 brave men got India independence. That's a gross exaggeration. At the same point of time, yes, it is something that prompted the British to consider an immediate withdrawal. So one could best argue that Bose and INA, more importantly not Bose, but primarily INA, contributed to hastening the attainment of Indian freedom. It's not that Bose brought freedom to India and there is no contribution of anybody else. So one has to understand that yes, the contribution of militant nationalism needs to be appreciated, but at the same point of time, that does not mean that 30 years of mass struggle had yielded nothing. Okay, it had created the fertile ground and that sense of nationalism ultimately which was capitalized upon. And you see, it is this sense of nationalism which permeates the soldiers who come out in support, and that is what prompts the British to consider early devolution of power. Now, the Cabinet Mission Plan came in 1946. So you can write about the Cabinet Mission Plan also. In 1946, the Cabinet Mission Plan that came in 1946 saw the British propose, the Cabinet Mission Plan of 1946 saw the British propose what? The grouping of Indian states into three categories: Section A, Section B, and Section C. And this grouping of Indian states into three categories was done with what objective? With the objective, the Cabinet Mission Plan actually, first and foremost, you must remember, it rejected what? The demand for a separate Pakistan. The Muslim League since 1940s was demanding a separate province for Muslims in Northwest and East, but it was explicitly rejected only in 1946 for the first time by the British. And the British rejected the demand for a separate Pakistan, pointing out that in the proposed Pakistan, there would be a large non-Muslim population in both what? West and East. In the West, for example, they pointed out that 48% of the population would be non-Muslim, whereas in the East, 40% of the population would be non-Muslim. So they rejected the demand for a separate Pakistan on this basis that in this Pakistan, the non-Muslim population would be also very huge, and to that extent, such a partition may cause fear and insecurity in the mind of the large non-Muslim populations as well. Then, it also proposed, so basically, it is in this context that you need to understand that they said, what? The Cabinet Mission Plan said that there cannot be a separate Pakistan. So if there can't be a separate Pakistan, what about the demands of the Muslim League? So it is at this point that they said that short of partition, we can do what? This. The grouping of Indian states into three categories, and do what? That the idea and the context was this, that Indian states would be grouped into three categories. Section A, B, C. Section A would be the non-Muslim states. Section B would be the Muslim states in Northwest. And Section C would be the Muslim states in East. And these three sections of states will have three different constitutions. Okay? And पहले आप समझ लीजिए, then we'll write down, no issues. These three separate groups of states will have three different constitutions. And in these three different constitutions, they will be given what? Autonomy. maximum autonomy. Okay, meaning that they will make their own laws, have their own budget, all of that they will have. They will have a largely what confederal kind of a structure, where most powers will be in the hands of provinces, but there will still be a common center which will have the control of the army, which will have the control of the foreign policy, which will have the control of communications. So there will be loose center and powerful autonomous three groups of provinces, section A, section B and section C. All of them will have their separate constitutions as well. What? For example, you look, and this idea is not something which is unimaginable. For example, in US, you have a federal structure, and in that federal structure, every state has its own constitution, and there is one common central US constitution as well. Right? So, or for example, for Marathas, but even I'm saying for currently, you see, presently also, US is a very clear example. Right? So, in that context, or European Union, one could argue. But you see, so that is what they're saying. Grouping of Indian states, giving maximum powers to the provinces, but yet avoiding a what? Partition. That is what was the central idea of the cabinet mission plan. Okay. So this section, this grouping of Indian states into three categories. Section A would be the non-Muslims, majority states. Section B would be the Muslim majority states in the northwest, and section C would be the Muslim majority states in the east. Muslim majority states in the east. So there would be such a grouping of Indian states, and that will avoid a what? Partition. At the same point of time, also, as I've told you, that nowhere in no plan do you need to say that the British were proposing independence. They are still proposing a dominion status. Sab mein, from August offer to Cripps mission to Wavell plan to cabinet mission plan to the next, that is the Mountbatten plan. In that also there will be a proposal only of a dominion status. Do not mark in prelims that this plan proposed independence to India. Ki Mountbatten plan, aapne bola, after Mountbatten plan independence came, so Mountbatten plan proposed independence to India. Aisa nahi. Also proposed dominion status. Okay. Now, this is what is being proposed here. And just one more factual fact that the cabinet mission plan was composed of 3 members of the British cabinet who were sent primarily to discuss with Indians, and these are whom? Again, Stafford Cripps, Pethick Lawrence and A.V. Alexander. Stafford Cripps, Pethick Lawrence and A.V. Alexander. Okay. And they proposed also a dominion status, not written. Okay. So they also proposed a dominion status. This is the central point, the grouping of Indian states into 3 categories. But what was the problem? Why was this plan not implemented? The issue was what? The problem, the central problem with this plan was that the Muslim League argued that the grouping is compulsory. Jinnah said, okay, I'm fine with the cabinet mission plan. I'm fine with the cabinet mission plan. Let there be no partition. We are ready to work under the system provided the Constituent Assembly compulsorily abides by the Constituent Assembly, which will, draft a new constitution for India, must compulsorily abide by this grouping, or this grouping must be compulsory. There must be no tinkering with this grouping of Indian regions into 3 different groups of states. This grouping of Indian states this grouping of Indian states is compulsory. Okay, this grouping of Indian states is compulsory, is what was argued by the Muslim League, that they said if as long as the Constituent Assembly is giving a commitment that it will abide by this grouping of Indian states into 3 categories, we are fine with it. Okay, but the Congress said no. The Congress argued against, the Congress said that we can't give a commitment. The Congress said that the Constituent Assembly would consider the proposed grouping but was what? Not kya? Bound by it. The Constituent Assembly would consider the proposed grouping but was not bound by it. Okay. So, in the sense that they did not give the commitment that that Constituent Assembly will abide by this proposed grouping of Indian states into 3 categories. They said it will consider. If the Constituent Assembly approves, it would probably go ahead, otherwise it could even change this grouping. But the Muslim League said no, we want a firm assurance. They asked the British to clarify whether they wanted this grouping to be optional or compulsory. The British said it must be compulsory. Congress said no. Congress is, now this is the thing, that the cabinet mission plan is often, मैं आपको बस बता रहा हूँ, कोई पूछेगा नहीं, लेकिन ये जो आप बार बार आप मुझसे पूछेंगे उसका जवाब है कि, and this has been pointed out a number of times, that many argue that Jinnah was not very serious about partition till the very end, and he was willing to give it up, the demand for partition, if he got a good share of power. And many argue that Jinnah's idea that he is okay with the cabinet mission plan, where he proposed support for the cabinet mission plan, shows that he was fine with not a partition as long as he was getting a substantial devolution of power. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing is, it also shows that the Congress was keen to avoid any kind of commitment which actually could eventually lead to a partition. Okay, so that's one thing about the cabinet mission plan which is often very intensely debated, that this plan fell apart not because of the Muslim League but because of the Congress. Now Bipin Chandra argues another side to it and says that even if Jinnah would have probably agreed with the cabinet mission plan, but for 6 years they had been demanding a separate Pakistan. Now giving up the demand of Pakistan at such a late stage, whether many within the Muslim League would have accepted Jinnah's position or not is not very clear. Or whether Jinnah was also very serious, or whether Jinnah could have also flipped later. All these are questions which are conjectures. I can't give you any definite answer for them. But yes, this much remains true, that Congress objections led to the falling of the cabinet mission plan. Okay, that Congress opposed this compulsory grouping of Indian states into 3 categories, whereas the Muslim League said that it must be compulsory. This led to the breakdown of talks and the cabinet mission plan. Okay, and this is happening in 1946. Eventually, as the cabinet mission plan broke down, you see, in 1947, in January 1947, what happens is, the British government issued a declaration. The British government issued a declaration that it is Clement Attlee's statement. It was Clement Attlee's statement, who was the British Prime Minister, that within a year, the British would transfer power to one or more centers. Within a year, the British would transfer power to one or more centers. That is there. Now, one or more centers, the British, by 1947, the situation was worsening. The cabinet mission plan did not yield any conclusions. There was a general political instability. The Muslim League continued to press ahead with its demand. And you see, the Muslim League kept on arguing that the Muslims are unsafe under a structure dominated by Congress. The Hindu Mahasabha also kept on arguing that Hindus are unsafe if the Muslim League or the Congress, anybody, if Congress makes any deal with the Muslim League also, Hindus are unsafe and Hindus are anyways unsafe under the Muslim League. तो देखिए हिंदू खतरे में है और मुस्लिम भी खतरे में है, सब खतरे में है, ठीक है. बच्चा कौन है? अमेरिका में बोल रहे हैं, अमेरिका भी खतरे में, वॉर ऑन टेरर, एवरी सबको ही खतरे में. So that is it. But that is what is being said. 1947, there is an atmosphere of fear. And in the meanwhile, in 1946, cabinet mission plan does not yield anything. Elections are held to put up a interim government. Okay, to whom there will be a devolution of power. The British have decided devolution of power will happen, but to what extent is not clearly decided, but it is decided the devolution of power. And they said that an interim government will be put in place for which elections were held in 1946. Now it is in these elections which were held in a time of religious tensions and communal polarization, and it is at this time that you see what? In the 1946 elections, Congress also performed well and so did the Muslim League. The Muslim League got almost 86% of the Muslim votes and Congress got 90% of the non-Muslim votes. Okay, so you see that there is a certain degree of what? Polarization. Now, not everybody had the voting rights. So again, there's no universal voting rights for all. You can't make very comprehensive, concrete generalizations, but yet some generalizations could be made. That it was clear that within a decade, what had been witnessed was an intense polarization or communalization of politics. देखिए, तो ऐसा होता है, 10 साल बहुत होते हैं, अभी 5 ही हुए, right? So 10 years, so 1937 to 1946, there was an intense degree of polarization, partly aided by the Hindu Mahasabha, partly aided by the Muslim League. And this produced outcomes in the 1946 elections where the Muslims League also got a significant degree of votes. Jinnah was convinced that they were on the right track. This is the time to continue pressing with the demand. The British then announced what? In 1947 that we are soon transferring power within a year. And to bring in urgency to the transfer of power and to negotiations for transfer of power, he brought in whom? He brought in Mountbatten. Mountbatten was appointed what? Mountbatten was appointed as the Viceroy, and Mountbatten was appointed as the Viceroy, and this is happening somewhere in March, April. Or the Governor General, and Mountbatten was given the task of bringing about a speedy resolution, okay, or a speedy conclusion on transfer of power. To that extent, Mountbatten firstly did what? He started talking to the Congress as well as the Muslim League, and then tried to see whether a partition could be avoided. When he came to the conclusion that a partition could not be avoided because of the demands of both the Muslim League and partly the positions of the Congress, he argued that, okay, we'll go ahead with the partition. So in that context, Mountbatten firstly announced what? Proposed what? Dominion status. Secondly, he proposed what? That if a partition was to be carried out, it would be done to ensure, it would be done, in a manner meant to ensure maximum unity. कैबिनेट मिशन प्लान की तरह देखिए, if any of these plans would have been implemented, no other plan is implemented apart from the Mountbatten plan. One plan is coming only because the previous one is not being accepted. One proposal is not being accepted, then the next is coming. So it is very obvious that if Mountbatten plan is coming, or if Wavell plan is, if cabinet mission plan is coming, then if Mountbatten plan is coming, then cabinet mission was not accepted. If cabinet mission is coming, Wavell was not accepted. That is why from your prelims point of view, you need to know the key reason why one plan is failing. Okay, that is that. So in 1947, they said that if a partition had to be carried out, it will be carried out in a manner to ensure maximum unity. Matlab, what this meant was that there will be only two political entities created, India and Pakistan. And this meant that what? Princely states in India could join either India or Pakistan. They could not form an independent entity of their own. The second thing was that even while joining India or Pakistan, what will also be kept in mind are other practical technicalities. For example, Hyderabad. This was primarily to, for example, hint at many other states. For example, Hyderabad first said that we will want to be an independent state. The British pointed out, Mountbatten pointed out, that's not possible. You have to join either India or Pakistan. Hyderabad then said, okay, we'll join Pakistan. Mountbatten said that is not possible because we can't have a country where there is no territorial contiguity between its parts. So you can't have a Pakistan with one limb in the west, one in the east and one in the south. So he said that there can be no question of joining Pakistan. Okay. And all these, Hyderabad is making its decisions how? Is it doing a referendum? No, it is the princely rulers of Hyderabad, the Nizams, who are making this, decision, etc. So ultimately, this demand for joining Pakistan is also rejected. So ultimately, what Hyderabad remains with, the rulers of Hyderabad remain with, is only one choice, and that is to join India. Okay. And there are similarly other stories also. Now we don't need to, we'll discuss all of that in more detail in post-independence history. Junagadh, Jodhpur, Jammu and Kashmir, whatever, right? So that is there. Now that is a very, we'll look at that trajectory very differently in detail later. But this independence of princely states was ruled out and everybody was told either to join India or Pakistan. Similarly, Northwest Frontier Province, where Abdul Ghaffar Khan came from. Abdul Ghaffar Khan and many from Northwest Frontier Province presented their demand that they were against a partition. And if a partition had to be carried out, they would want to join India. But that also Mountbatten ruled out, saying that that's not possible because of the issue of absence of territorial contiguity between the two. So you see, that is what is being said here. If a partition was to be carried out, it would be done in a manner to ensure maximum unity. Rejected Hyderabad's demand or princely states' demand for what? For independence or joining for independence or for joining Pakistan. Now, another thing to know is that now that it was decided that if a partition had to be carried out, boundaries would have to be drawn. So a boundary commission was also appointed. Now I'm not getting into the details of this, but actually Mountbatten had already, while he was talking to the Congress and Muslim League, and when it became clear to him that a partition could not be avoided, he appointed a boundary commission under Ratcliffe, Cyril Ratcliffe. And this boundary commission then started doing what? Rounds. It started doing aerial surveys. Now, Cyril Ratcliffe was the British cartographer, map drawer, okay, who had first come to India ever in his life, only in April-May 1947. He had never been to India before. And ultimately, he had never been to India before. He had known little about India. He came to India, under him a boundary commission was established. Under it, there were 2 Hindu representatives and 2 Muslim representatives. And they were to tour the northwest as well as the east regions, and then come up with a proposal from where the boundaries will exactly pass. For this, they would meet representatives of both Hindu communities and Muslim communities in all the regions, and then come up with a proposed boundary. And this proposal, the exact proposal, was kept secret till the very last. Why? Because if, say, they said that Lahore would go to Pakistan, then Hindus in Lahore would say that no, it must go to India, or vice versa. Anything could happen. And in that sense, if the proposal was made public, there would be claims and there would be counterclaims. So right now, they did not make the proposal public, but they kept having the deliberations. Now all this partition, all this map drawing was not being done on the ground, it was being done on the map. The ground level delineation of the boundary had not yet happened. There was an atmosphere of fear and insecurity and uncertainty. For example, by the end of July, it was announced that a partition would be done. But what was not announced, from where exactly the partition line would pass. So for example, many in Lahore kept arguing that Lahore is 80 kilometers from Amritsar. Okay, so 65 to 70 or 80 kilometers, that is the difference from Amritsar to Lahore. So many argued that Lahore will lie on the Indian side, and it was not unthinkable given the fact that Lahore, played a very important role in the Indian freedom struggle. Also, there were a number of prominent Congress members also who came from Lahore. So even Manishankar Iyer was born in Lahore. So all these fellows, a lot of people in the Indian political establishment, freedom struggle, etc. came from Lahore. You had the Lahore session of the Congress. You had so many things in Lahore. So in that context, many argued Lahore will lie on the Indian side of the border. You had Lajpat Rai from Lahore. You had Bhagat Singh from Lahore. Right? So many people argued Lahore would lie on the Indian side of the border. But then others said no, it is on the Pakistan side of the border. And especially in the bordering areas, villages, etc., even after partition was announced, they did not know whether they are in India or in Pakistan. The partition was a problem in itself, but what was an even bigger problem was the hasty and the unplanned nature in which the partition was carried out. Also, you see, because of the fear of religious persecution, etc., there is migration from both sides. Hindus migrating from Muslim majority areas in northwest and Muslims from other parts of India to northwest. And it is in this migration, you see, in this mass migration which was happening, to carry out an orderly mass migration, you required law enforcement. And there were already religious tensions, communal polarizations, and law enforcement was also weak. The only institution which could have carried this out in an orderly fashion was the army. But the army was also being partitioned between India and Pakistan. So even the army was not very effectively deployed to maintain the law and order situation. And thus, more than 100,000 people were killed in this partition. If the Indian freedom struggle was not a bloody event, partition was. Okay? And to that extent, the problem with partition, so whatever may be the problem with the idea of partition or not, partitions have happened in many other areas also. For example, Czechoslovakia became Czech Republic and Slovakia. Okay. Partitions have happened many other places. Austro-Hungarian Empire became Austria and Hungary. Partitions have happened many places in the world. But what made the Indian partition more bloody was the unplanned nature and the poorly conducted exercise. And a large part of this blame went to the British, who could not oversee an effective transfer of power in a politically stable environment. That is what eventually brings about the partition. India also got a dominion status, so did Pakistan. On August 14, 1947, Pakistan declared independence and its first Governor General was Jinnah. On August 15, India got independence and its first Governor General was Mountbatten, and after Mountbatten went back, it was C. Rajagopalachari. Okay, and the interim Indian government was in place from 1946 to 1949. Fresh Constituent Assembly worked for 3 years, composed of these people who? The people who got elected in 1946 and formed the interim government. This Constituent Assembly drafted the new constitution. A new constitution was put in place, and elections were held in 1950, and a new government comes in place by 1951. That is what is eventually the transition. And that is that's the thing that is very less studied, but that's the most spectacular achievement of the Indian freedom struggle, is not the overthrow of British, as I keep saying all the time. The spectacular achievement of the Indian freedom struggle was that within 3 or 4 years, you had a functional constitution in place, orderly elections, and a orderly transfer of power started happening from 1950-51. Indians today take it that what's the big deal? What's the big deal is that Pakistan was created, Bangladesh was created, eventually, never had orderly elections to this day. Okay. Nepal also tried to move towards democracy, never really happened till now in 2016. Bhutan moved towards democracy only in 2008. Even in South Asia, Sri Lanka, where the British also withdrew, never became a very effective democracy. Maldives. What frankly remains India's biggest achievement of the Indian freedom struggle is what? A functional democratic institutional structure being put in place in a very orderly manner soon after independence. Why a lot of this could happen is because of what? The Indian freedom struggle had a Congress, and that's partly the thing. Congress and Muslim League, the contrast is very glaring. Muslim League's organizational capacity was very limited. It had managed to obtain a Pakistan, but did not know now what to do with it. There is no intensive debate within the Muslim League of what will be the structure of the state. That's the bigger achievement. What many say that what Nehru to kya tha, ye tha aur wo tha. For all his shortcomings on the Indo-China war and the 1962 defeat of India and the mistakes on the China policy, you see, one of the spectacular achievements was this, that you had democratic institutions being put in India when India had no major history of democratic institutions, at least in the past 300-400 years. That is what is the achievement. And that is something that, that's popularly even very well known, that after partition and then a large number of refugees came, and there is the Liaquat and Nehru Pact also. And, some war refugees were, their properties, they were allowed to sell off their properties, etc., everything. And then there are religious riots also in Delhi, etc. So a woman comes and grabs Nehru's collar and asks him that what did we get out of this partition apart from the violence, etc. Nothing of substance. Nehru said that you got what? You got, Nehru very calmly replied and said that you got something. You got the right to hold my collar and ask me that what have we achieved? That is what you've got. Okay, that you didn't have that under the British. Okay, आज आप पकड़ लीजिए किसी का कॉलर. आपने अगर आज प्रधानमंत्री का कॉलर पकड़ लिया, सोचिए क्या होगा आपका. So, you see, that is what was probably the bigger achievement of the Indian freedom struggle. the putting in place of mature democratic or putting in place of democratic institutions in place which allowed an orderly transfer of power and a democracy. It's not that democracy in India today doesn't have many problems, that is true. But the fact remained that India became a democracy when nobody expected it to. Okay, that is there. So, because a number of political authors then wrote that, India will not survive as a democracy. Either it will be broken into many parts. For example, Maulana Abdul Kalam, the first education minister, he said that Pakistan will not last for more than 25 years. And he was right. Pakistan did not last for 25 years. Many Western commentators, because it got broken into Pakistan and Bangladesh, right? But many Western political commentators argued India also won't last. But India did not witness a partition, right? So, again, after 1947, so a lot of that which is being taken granted today was not taken for granted in the 1940s and 50s. It required a lot of intensive political work. We'll see post-independence history. Dravidian movement was there in the 1960s, which said that we want a separate Dravid Nadu, a separate Dravid state. Okay, we have our own coast, we have our own language, we have our own tradition. Sab hai hamare paas. Why do we need to be agree to a imposition of Hindi? They want to speak Hindi, they speak Hindi in their regions. We speak our language, Tamil language, ancient language, सब कुछ है, culture है, Carnatic music है, port है, सब है. We'll form our own state. They are civilizationally different, we are civilizationally different. But India incorporated a lot of them, addressed a lot of them, and took care, a lot of them, often through constitutional means. Not always, but often through constitutional means. So that is what is there. That's a very big achievement, and that becomes even more clear. The bigger achievement of the Congress is visible in the post-independence period, which many Indians today have no sense of history. है ना? तो जब नहीं होता है कोई sense of history, तो यही होता है कि अरे क्या हुआ, कुछ नहीं हुआ, बस बोफोर्स हुआ, है ना? तो कांग्रेस मतलब बोफोर्स. Nirmala Sitharaman said that Bofors brought Rajiv Gandhi down, Rafael will bring back Modi. This is confidence. है ना? So, confidence की कमी नहीं होनी चाहिए जीवन में. Now, next you write, Boundary Commission was established under Cyril Ratcliffe and proposed the partition line. Now, August 14, 1947 is partition and independence for Pakistan, with Jinnah as the first Governor General, and August 15th is India and Dominion status. And you see, first it is Mountbatten, who is the Governor General, and then it is C. Rajgopalachari.
So Pakistan also got dominion status?
Dominion status. Pakistan also got dominion status, India also got dominion status. But 1950 India adopted a constitution and declared itself as what? Republic. तो फिर खत्म हो गया डोमिनियन स्टेटस. ऐसे नहीं हम हमेशा डोमिनियन रहे. After 1950, new constitution, republic. Clear? So that is that. Is this much clear? Now, so हो गई आपकी आज़ादी. That's it. Now what we're talking about is communalism and partition. 2 or 3 kind of questions. देखिए यहाँ पे prelims के जितने questions आएंगे, which will be on what are the proposals, why did they fail, if they failed, why did they fail, okay, which proposal succeeded, Mountbatten plan, ultimately, right? Now, the next thing that we're talking about is communalism and partition. देखिए, let's talk about communalism and partition, but इस पे तीन तरह के चार सवाल, 3 or 4 types of questions can be asked in your mains examination. Both Bipin Chandra and Shekhar Bandyopadhyay have written extensively about communalism. Even Bipin Chandra's original contribution to studying the Indian freedom struggle is actually his original research into the growth of communalism in the Indian freedom struggle. तो ये बार बार मेंस में पूछा जाता है. Okay. अगले साल अगर कांग्रेस की सरकार आ गई तो तब पक्के में पूछेंगे वो. Okay. So that is there. ये क्या हुआ है कि बिपिन चंद्रा की किताब को छापना बंद कर दिया बीजेपी ने. Bipin Chandra also wrote another book on communalism, which was published by the NBT, the National Book Trust. Bipin Chandra was the erstwhile director also of the National Book Trust, but right now the government has stopped publishing his book on communalism. Okay. So वो पक्के में आएगा. अगले साल अगर सरकार कांग्रेस की आ गई तो आप पक्के में पढ़ लीजिएगा. आएगा ही आएगा. Because when governments change, questions also change. थोड़ा थोड़ा questions change. Okay, but आएगी नहीं. चाहे हमें तो पढ़ना है ना, हम ऐसे थोड़ी छोड़ सकते हैं, हम पढ़ेंगे बाद में जब सरकार आएगी तब, right? But 2 or 3 questions, kind of questions can be made from here, and they've repeatedly been asked in your mains examination. For example, there's a question in your mains examination this year: discuss the difference between communalism and religiosity, and give one example to explain. They've asked before, was the partition of India inevitable? And also, communalism and religiosity, was the partition of India inevitable? And there's also one third type that you must know is to what extent the British policies can be held what? Responsible for the partition of partition. So these are the 3 types of questions which can be what? Asked from here. Now let's discuss. पहले तो हमें communalism और religiosity के बीच का difference समझ लेना चाहिए. Bipin Chandra has written extensively on this. Okay. Now, and there's a separate PowerPoint presentation for this. So I'm not going to dictate on communalism and partition. There's a separate PowerPoint presentation for this, and that is all the major points, so you don't need to worry. Okay. And but the first thing is, what is communalism and what is religiosity, and what is the similarity or difference between the two? So what is communalism? How do you define communalism? Secularism तो बहुत PhD है. What is communalism? What is communalism? How do you define communalism? Extreme form of religiosity. Hatred for others' religions is communalism. Anything else? Intolerance of others' religious beliefs and faiths. Anything else? Superiority of one religion over other. Forming or feeling within, or feeling a sense of oneness within one community. So, persons of same religion have similar social and economic. People of one religion have common social, economic and political interests. So okay, that's a type of communalism, that's true. And that's what partly Bipin Chandra says. Bipin Chandra defines communalism. This definition you must know. Communalism refers to the politicization of religious Communalism refers to the politicization of religious identity for political and economic gains of those what? For political and economic gains of those leading such what? Mobilizations. देखिए इसको एक लाइन में बिपिन चंद्रा डिफाइंस इन हिज book India Struggle Till Independence in one line. He gives this definition and then defines communalism in one line, quoting a Urdu poet, मजहब की सियासती दुकानदारी, using religion to capture power, using religion to using religious identity with the primary objective of capturing political and economic power. That is what is communalism. So for example, I say to you that all of you are of my religious community, you should vote for me. That is communalism. My political party will protect the interest of all you, because all of you belong to one religion, and that is we all belong to the same religion. My political party will protect your interests. That is communalism. ये हिंदुओं की पार्टी है, ये मुसलमानों की पार्टी है. That is communalism. Political party or any party which is aiming to, or any group of individuals which is aiming to capture political or economic power by invoking religious identity is communalism. What is religiosity? Bipin Chandra argues that religiosity is a deep sense of belief in one's religious values or ideas. Matlab, you believe that there is only one God and his name is Allah. If God came and told you that that's my name, how are you doing? Or there is only one God and that's Ram. Or there are three gods, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. Whatever you believe in, that's your sense of belief and you are entitled to it. You believe there is no God. That's also belief. You believe there is no God, just chill, enjoy your life as long as it lasts. There is no moksha, there is no afterlife, कुछ नहीं है. आप क्या चरवाका वाले? Chill. C for charvaka, C for chill. Even that's a personal belief. Whatever is your belief, as long as it is your personal belief, and you believe in your religious ideas, etc., and you follow the practices and rituals associated with it. You think cow is a sacred animal, so be it. You think that the goat has to reach heaven. Its time has come. So it's your personal belief. आप बोले मुर्गी is a sacred animal, ठीक है, वो आपका personal belief है. It's your personal belief, your ritual, your practice, do whatever. Okay, that is what is religiosity. Why is Bipin Chandra firstly differentiating between the two? He is trying to answer a very important question. One may not, एक second, पहला disclaimer है इस topic के लिए. These are Bipin Chandra's views, not my views. है ना? आपका view अलग हो सकता है. I don't care. Bipin Chandra's views is this. Okay, and one may or may not completely agree with his views. That's also there. Now, yes, अभी रुक जाइए, पहले मैं पूरा बता दूं, उसके बाद पूछेगा, मैं दूंगा जवाब सवाल पूछने का टाइम, because this is all very interrelated. Then Bipin Chandra says that he is trying to answer a very important question by differentiating between these two things. He is saying that he is trying to answer a very deeply important question, that is it that would a deeply religious society necessarily be a what? Communal one? Well, his answer is no. He is saying that India is a deeply religious society. It does not mean that it necessarily be a communal one. You can have a deep sense of belief in your religious values, cultures, traditions, etc., does not mean that you go around asking for votes or capturing political power, etc., on the basis of religious identity. That is what is communalism. सुनते रहिए बात, पहले जवाब और सवाल पूछने का समय बाद में मिलेगा. So he's saying is that just because a society is deeply religious need not be communal. You can have a religious individual who may say that I want to pray 5 times a day, but does not support the idea of asking for power on the basis of religious identity. Or you may have the opposite. You may have a deeply religious individual who is not communal one, or you may have a communal individual who is deeply. You may have a communal individual who may not be religious, or you may have a religious individual who may not be communal. And the classic example of this is often given as Jinnah. Jinnah or Maulana Azad, both are considered a very strong contrast in this. Jinnah, a deeply communal individual who said that, basically Muslims are unsafe, they need to support my political party, that is the All India Muslim League. And All India Muslim League will ensure that Muslims' welfare is ensured by forming a separate Pakistan. Okay, so that is what is communalism. And Jinnah's demand. But Jinnah's communalism, Jinnah was communal yet not religious. As I told you many a times before, it was a commonly known practice, commonly known fact that Jinnah was not a practicing Muslim. In the sense that he would not pray. He was openly known not to pray 5 times a day or God knows how many times a day. Secondly, he was also one who was known to drink alcohol. He was not the one who even kept a proper long beard conservative Muslims would keep. So he's not a very practicing Muslim. Yet he is saying that I am the protector of Muslim interest. And yet, on the other side, you have Maulana Azad, more of a conservative and a strongly religious Muslim, who was strongly a member of the Congress and opposed partition and opposed the communalization of politics. So, in that context, you can have people who can keep religion in their pocket or in their personal life and still not bring it in politics. Whereas you can have people who bring religion in politics, who drag religious identities into politics on a daily basis, but are not deeply religious individuals. That is the contrast that he's trying to make. So he's saying that India is a deeply religious society. People believe in all their festivals, all their beliefs, etc. Does not mean that they support that communalism. Okay. So there is no necessary inevitability that a deeply religious society is meant to be a communal one. Is that point clear? That is why I gave the example also of what Maulana Azad said, that he said that Pakistan will not last for even 25 years. He being a Muslim, saying that the so-called Muslim state of Pakistan will not last for 25 years is a clear categorization of, you can have religious individuals who are not communal. Okay, so that is there. Now, is that point clear? Firstly. Now, you can also start asking us question, ki sir, what if my religion says that my religion is better than everybody else's religion? I am saying that my religion is superior than everybody else's religion. Every religion has many sects, many interpretations. Hai ki nahi? There is Vaishnava sect, there is Shiva sect, there is this sect, there is that sect in Hinduism. In Islam also there are many sects. There may be certain sects which may preach superiority over other sects. That is true. But largely, if a religion adopts, most religions have multiple interpretations, and some sects of religion may propose that they are superior to others, but many other sects of religions propose that no religion is superior to other, or even argue for syncretic culture. For example, what? Bhakti and Sufi. Yahi hai na? So Bhakti and Sufi is like this only. So that is there. तभी ना भक्ति और सूफी को कोई नहीं पूछता आजकल. आज तक ना कोई हिंदू पूछता है भक्ति को, ना कोई मुस्लिम पूछता है सूफी को. भक्ति और सूफी भी साइडलाइन हो गए, क्योंकि ये पॉलिटिक्स कैसे होगा फिर अगर आप बोलेंगे कि अरे सबका ऐसा ही एक है, फिर कैसे पॉलिटिक्स होगा, राइट? So that's first thing. The second thing is, was the partition of India inevitable? To explain this, Bipin Chandra ने 3 chapter लिखे हैं communalism पे, in the thick Bipin Chandra. उन सबका summarization I'm telling you here in one go. Was the partition inevitable? To study this, one has to first know the growth of communalism in the Indian freedom struggle. To explain the growth of communalism in the Indian freedom struggle, we say that growth of communalism in Indian freedom struggle happened not immediately, but over a period of time, and it went through 3 stages. We can, for simplifying purpose, say mild communalism, moderate and extreme or severe communalism. Mild, moderate and extreme communalism. Now, देखिए, what is this mild, moderate and extreme? Firstly, and these are 3 stages, he says that in the beginning of 1900s, communalism in India was of a mild variety. By 1940s, it became of a extreme variety. Okay. Now, firstly, why does he say so, and why is he categorizing it into 3 phases? That's what we are studying first. Mild communalism is what? Is the idea that people who belong to what? One religious community also have common political and economic interest. So when I say that you all are Hindus, you should vote for me or for my political party because we are a protector of Hindu interest. I am communal according to Bipin Chandra. तभी किताब छपना बंद होगी. Or if I say that you are all Muslims and I say that I am the protector of Muslim interest, then I am a communal individual. Why? He is saying so because when I say that I will protect your interest because you are Hindus or you are Muslims, I am assuming that all Muslims have common political and economic interests and all Hindus have common political and economic interests. And he gives a practical example. He says, for example, that this assumption, you can write first mild communalism if you want. How does he define? He defines that the assumption that individuals belonging to a common religious community have common or uniform political and economic interests. That is mild communalism. That individuals belonging to a common religious community have common uniform political and economic interests. That is mild communalism. Why? Because he's saying that's not true. Just because you all belong to one religion does not mean you have common political and economic interests. ये भ्रम है आपका. That is what he is saying. आपका बेवकूफ बनाया जा रहा है. That because you have one common religious interest, you have one common political and economic interest also. Practical example he is giving. To say, for example, the Hindu क्या जमींदार, the Hindu zamindars political and economic interests are pitted against the Hindu peasant. Hindu zamindar wants what? Continuation of zamindari. And peasant wants what? Abolition of zamindari. What does the Muslim zamindar want? Continuation of zamindari. And what does the Muslim peasant want? Abolition of zamindari. So whose political and economic interests are common?
Zamindars, class.
Their political and economic interests of Hindu and Muslim zamindars are common and Hindu and Muslim peasants are common. लेकिन आपको बोला क्या जा रहा है? आपको बोला जा रहा है ये that Hindu zamindars and Hindu peasants have common political and economic. बेवकूफ बनाया जा रहा है आपका. He is saying this assumption that because you have common religious identity, you have common political and economic interests is a false assumption. So that is there. Okay, this assumption itself is wrong. And why? Because he is actually saying that any individual has multiple identities. And the identity of, there are multiple identities of an individual. You have a religious identity also, you have a economic identity also, that you are a peasant or a zamindar. And that is known, it is not necessary that religious identities and economic identities overlap. So what happens then? What happens then is this kind of a problem, that this notion that because you have religious common identity, you have common political and economic identities and interests is wrong. It's a false notion. Because political and economic interests may cut across religious identities. तो ये notion ही गलत है. आपके साथ खिलवाड़ हो रहा है. Okay. Next is moderate. Moderate में एक step आगे जाती है कहानी. इसका एग्जाम्पल क्या है माइल्ड कम्युनलिज्म का? एग्जाम्पल इज द फॉर्मेशन ऑफ मुस्लिम लीग इन 1906 एंड लिखना चाहे चाहे ना चाहे आंसर में ये बात अलग है. फॉर्मेशन ऑफ हिंदू महासभा इन 1915. That is what Bipin Chandra is arguing. Formation of Muslim League and the formation of Hindu Mahasabha. Then what is moderate? The example of moderate is very good way to understand it. The example of moderate communalism is what? Separate the idea of separate electorates is an example of moderate communalism given 1909 onwards. And here what is said, that the political and economic interests of different communities are the political and economic interests of different communities are different or separate from each other. And thus they require separate representatives. They have separate issues and thus they require separate representatives. Okay. Or indirectly it also says what? Only an individual from one community can represent the interests of that community. That is what separate electorate is. That is saying is moderate communalism. Why? Because there is a certain amount of distrust. That individual from Hindu candidate hai, so he cannot represent Muslim interest. Pehla assumption ये है कि all Muslim interests is same. That is a wrong assumption. The second assumption is that people from an individual from another religious community cannot represent the interest of a different community. This also is based on this assumption that, for example, issues are different. देखिए, Hindus need separate representatives and Muslims need separate representatives. Why? Because issues of Hindus are different and issues of Muslims are different. जैसे क्या? जैसे for example, you may say that Hindus want what? Education and health. And Muslims want what? Water and land. Their issues are different and their issues are different. So they need different representatives. Okay, that's one possibility. Or the other possibility is what? That perhaps the issue is same but you don't trust. देखिए, so is एक possibility ये that your issues are different, that is why you need different representatives. But often it is said क्या आजकल कि everybody wants health, everybody wants education, everybody wants safe drinking water and safe air to breathe. ऐसा तो नहीं है that when Hindus will come, then only Hindus will get safe air to breathe or clean water to drink. Okay, so are the issues really different for different communities? That is itself a false notion. अरे एजुकेशन सबको चाहिए, 15 लाख सबको चाहिए. Everybody wants political and economic gains. And often their issues are also similar, but politicians may portray that no, you require your own representatives because your issues will not find representation unless you have your representative. Okay. That is the idea of moderate communalism. But extreme is when you say that there is a zero-sum equation. There is a zero-sum equation and the interests of one community are pitted against the interest of one community are pitted against the interest of another community. Matlab, this is a zero-sum equation. This happens when 1940s onwards, where the Muslim League argued that, देखिए, separate electorates is what? A constitutional provision under British. It's a part of the written legal framework, what? Separate electorates. And Muslim League is saying what? Once there are separate representatives for Muslims and separate for Hindus, whose interests can be protected? Muslims' interests can be protected. Hindus' interest is also protected already. Muslim interests will also get protected. When they have their own representatives. But in 1940s, Muslim League is saying what? Separate electorate is not enough to protect Muslim interest. You need a separate state. Why? Because Hindu representatives and Muslim representatives cannot work together. पहले तो आपने बोला कि Hindus have common representatives and Muslims have common representatives. Hindus have common interest and Muslims have common interest. यही रोशन गलत है, Bipin Chandra is saying. Then he's saying, you are saying that Hindus representatives must be separate from Muslim representatives because their issues, interests are different. But they can, once they have their representatives, they can work together under a common framework. But अब तीसरे आपने बोल दिया, अब तो आप शक्ल ही नहीं देख सकते. Interests of Hindus and interests of Muslims cannot go together. They are opposite. And their representatives cannot work together. And that is why they need to part ways and have separate states. That is what is extreme communalism. When 1914 onwards, Muslim leagues, especially from the Lahore session, it's Lahore or the Pakistan Day resolution, argued what? That separate electorates are inadequate. And you need what? And what is required is a separate state. Because, why? Hindus are unsafe. Sorry, Muslims are unsafe. under structure dominated by whom? कांग्रेस. क्या बात है, मतलब कांग्रेस लैक्स इमेजिनेशन. बीजेपी को बीजेपी की गेम पे डिफीट करने के लिए द कांग्रेस मस्ट कॉल whom? मुस्लिम लीग. बोलो मुस्लिम लीग बताए हमारे अंदर कौन खतरे में है? मुसलमान. बीजेपी के अंडर नहीं था, हमारे अंडर है, तभी तो हमने पार्टीशन करा दिया. पॉलिटिक्स खेलना है और ऊपर लेवल पे जाके खेलना. एवरीबडी मस्ट गिव अप द प्रिटेंस ऑफ क्या सेक्युलरिज्म. जस्ट अ सेकंड. Much clear. Now, this is what is extreme communalism. This is what is extreme communalism according to Bipin Chandra. Now he is saying that society can have communalism. Societies often have certain amount of communalism. It can be of a mild variety, it can be of a moderate variety. But when communalism in India took extreme form, that is when it led to partition. So was the partition inevitable? Yes and no, both. It was not inevitable in 1900s or in 1920s, but in 1940s it became inevitable when communalism took a turn for extreme. As long as it was mild and moderate, what were you saying? Ki separate electorates may it can be accommodated. Demands of Muslim League could be accommodated under separate electorates, under the constitutional legal framework. But after 1940s, you are saying separate electorate is not enough. That is when partition becomes inevitable. So that is why, is it that post-independence India does not have communalism? It definitely does. But perhaps not of as extreme a variety as was seen in the 1940s. It's not inevitable that mild will lead to moderate and moderate will lead to extreme. ऐसा कोई जरूरी नहीं है कि mild होगा फिर moderate होगा फिर extreme होगा. If there can be communalization of politics, there can also be what? Secularization of politics. केजरीवाल निकाल रहे हरियाणा में क्या? अस्पताल स्कूल रैली निकाल रहे. You see, इस पोस्टर इज सेइंग अस्पताल स्कूल रैली. कई लोग मंदिर रैली निकाल रहे हैं. कोई अस्पताल की और स्कूल की रैली निकाल रहा है. Who is saying that अस्पताल and school, hospital and schools are required and will take out a rally on that agenda? They are the people who are saying what? Keep religious issues away. Okay. So that is what is there. So if there is communalization of politics, there can also happen a secularization of politics. But it is, whatever happens is a long drawn process. And at the same point of time, it is not inevitable that mild will become moderate and moderate will become extreme or. So that is there. Is that point clear? Yes? Okay. So that is something that you need to know. Yes. Any doubts still here? सच आंसर सुनना चाहते हैं कि कितना आंसर जो लिखना है वो सुनना है? What you don't need to write in your answers is that Tilak is a communal individual. You don't need to write that in your answers. But what you can still write in your answer is that, and this is something that others have also written. Okay. That Bandyopadhyay also writes that the mixing of religious identities with political issues was to have repercussions. Okay, that's there. Repercussions do not mean partition. Because there's nothing inevitable in 1890s which says that there's going to be a partition, or Tilak is using Ganpati and Shivaji festival, so there is going to be a partition. Nobody is saying that. But from the viewpoint of modern day, definition of communalism, using a religious platform to argue for political objectives is communalism. Suppose I stand in Birla Mandir and I say, please give vote to my political party. Suppose I stand in a mosque in Jama Masjid and say, please give vote to my political party. That is communalism, hands down. उसमें क्या है? लेकिन आंसर में ये, लेकिन and this is a finer point also. Not every communalism also leads to partition. Okay, that is there. Huh? If Bipin Chandra would have argued, it would have been that it is mild communalism. But हमें कुछ नहीं कहना है. हमें बस ये कहना है that it is was to have repercussions for the Indian freedoms, or it would have repercussions. That's it. Revivalist nationalism, ये लिखा हुआ है, ये PowerPoint presentation में भी लिखा हुआ है मैंने. That revivalist nationalism brought a certain degree of intermingling of religious issues and nationalism, which would have repercussions. That is it. हाँ वो भी है, हाँ जो भी थे, हाँ that Muslims, Hindus, both organizations started religious reconversion movements. That's true. Anything else? Last question. हो गया clear? Okay. So एक्चुअली हमारे दिमाग में सवाल आते रहते हैं, लेकिन वही एक बार जब पूरा एक बार हो जाता है, देन यू गेट अ होलिस्टिक व्यू, तो दिन आपको समझ में आता है ऐसा भी तो हो सकता है. नाउ द नेक्स्ट इशू टू टॉक अबाउट इज व्हाट? द नेक्स्ट इशू टू टॉक अबाउट इज व्हाट? लास्ट इशू फॉर दिस टॉपिक, एंड दैट इज व्हाट इज द रोल ऑफ ब्रिटिश पॉलिसीज. The role of British policies in communalism or in partition. पहली बात तो there are two things. One that we often talk about, and you all know, we have discussed before also. What is that? The divide and rule policy. And the divide and rule policy was of keeping people what? Tied to politicization of religious identity, keeping people tied to religious identity and prevent the emergence of what? Of a larger national identity. And prevent the emergence of a larger national identity. And its examples are there. What? Partition of Bengal, or separate electorates. And this separate electorates, even for example, Bipin Chandra would say what? Even granting separate electorate to Sikhs is communal. अरे खालिस्तानी मूवमेंट भी तो हो सकता है. किसी को भी आप सेपरेट इलेक्टोरेट्स दें, दैट इज कम्युनल. ऑल सिक्स हैव कॉमन पॉलिटिकल एंड इकोनॉमिक इंटरेस्ट. ऐसा ही नहीं. चंडीगढ़ में जो बैठा है उसका पॉलिटिकल एंड इकोनॉमिक इंटरेस्ट ऑफ दैट सिक इंडिविजुअल इज नॉट लाइक समबडी हु इज सिटिंग प्रोबेबली समवेयर इन सम रूरल एरिया इन पंजाब, से मोगा से कहीं और जहां भी बैठा है. सो दैट इज दैट, you know, that assumption. So separate electorates idea, तो इसके I have given more examples in the PowerPoint presentation. But I also want to talk about another thing, and that is the resource conflict theory. When does communalism flourish? When do conflicts flourish? Any conflict, social conflict, any social conflict, whether that is a religious, whether that's a communal conflict or ethnic conflict, any conflict flourishes when resources are scarce. Okay, when resources are scarce, that is when conflicts are more likely to happen. Abundant drinking water is there is no conflict. Drinking water is limited. You say, I will protect the interests of all Hindus. They will have enough drinking water. You will say, I'll protect the interests of all Muslims. They will have enough drinking water. So when resources are abundant, social conflicts are less likely. And the British introduced what? Economic development or underdevelopment? Underdevelopment and exploitation of India, which led to economic exploitation, led to what? More jobs or less jobs? तो फिर क्या होगा? Conflict. Upper caste want reservation in jobs, saying lower castes are taking away jobs. All of that is happening. Why? Because there are less jobs. Upper caste won't say there must be more jobs. ये argument नहीं है. Argument ये है कि हमको भी दे दो reservation. That is what Gadkari said. Give reservation to upper caste also. There are no jobs. ले लो reservation. The size of the pie keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So conflict will get stronger and stronger and stronger. That's it. That is what resource conflict is saying. So British are not just using divide and rule. They are economically exploiting Indians. And economic underdevelopment of Indians, lack of jobs, lack of economic opportunities created tensions and more conflicts, eventually leading to what? Partition and contributing to tensions. तो देखिए ऐसे ही है. जब नौकरी नहीं है तो आपके पास वैसे ही कुछ नहीं है करने को घर पे बैठ के, तो आपको बोला 5,000 रुपए लो और चलो वहीं बनाएंगे, तो आप भी चल दिए, घूम भी आएंगे, वो बना भी आएंगे और 5,000 रुपए ले भी आएंगे. बट यू आर 20,000 रुपीज अ मंथ का जॉब, यू विल से आप बनाए, 500 हमसे भी ले जाए. राइट, सो दैट इज देयर. So resource conflict theory, here the economic underdevelopment and exploitation under British rule, the economic underdevelopment and exploitation under British rule brought scarcity of jobs and economic opportunities making conflicts more likely, making conflicts including communal conflicts more what? Likely. And thus British policies also were actively responsible for fueling communal tensions and furthering tensions to the extent that eventually led to the partition, whether that's divide and rule or whether that's the general economic underdevelopment under the British rule. That is there. Clear? Any doubts still here?
Sir, whenever there is a question like to what extent, how to
हाँ, तो इसी के मैंने बोला नहीं, हर question to what extent तो can differ. इस question में to what extent में you have to say this, that mild and moderate was communalism, which would not have eventually led to, perhaps they may not have fueled the eventually led to partition, but once it took extreme form, that is when it took the form of partition. So it was perhaps not inevitable in the mild and moderate stages, but it became inevitable in the extreme stages. Clear? Any other doubt?
So what should be the introduction in this kind of?
Introduction किस चीज में?
ये third वाला जो question है, to what extent?
To what extent the British could be held responsible? Conclusion यही है that the British, the conclusion, okay, so the conclusion for this would be this, that ultimately the British policies fueled active political divide between the two communities facilitated the politicization of their identities and took no active steps to tackle the communalization fueled by Muslim League in the 1940s. So did not do anything also to prevent the communalization that was being done by the Muslim League, especially in the 1940s. That is there. Introduction में कुछ नहीं लिखना होता है. Introduction में you can always say that firstly what is communalism. That is it. Anything else?
Sir, communalism is politicization of religious identity. So if there is politicization within subsections in a religion, that will also be
That will also be called communalism. So for example, if Ambedkar is saying, that this is a particular caste and the interests of this caste are not represented, or of the backward caste, so that is why Ambedkar is saying हर caste की नहीं करना है, socially and educationally backward. And in the caste system, social and educational backwardness overlaps with occupation. Caste doesn't fall in the same category technically as religion would often fall. Most caste groups were supposed to be occupationally also similar. तो शूद्रा का political and economic interest उसकी caste identity से घनघोर overlap है. Right? That is there. So the Shudra is also the landless farmer. So Shudra will demand what? Land reforms. It's not exactly the same. That's there. Okay. Identity politics is what, when you say that this is my social identity and I want political power based on my social identity. That's what identity politics. It's good as well as bad. It has positive things also and it has some issues also. We'll discuss more of that in social issues. Identity politics and its growth in India. Anything else? Anything else? So we'll stop here. Okay. And that largely completes your communalism issue. Ma'am will start taking your class from 2 o'clock. आप अपना lunch वंच जो करना है वो कर लीजिए. And that leaves us with a few other topics, peasant or tribals और थोड़ा बहुत women के बारे में हम will talk about. I'll call you for another one of these days, 1.5 hour extra or so, and we'll complete. कल देखते हैं, अगर कल हो जाए तो कल ही कर देंगे. ठीक. कल हाँ नहीं कल तो ऑप्शनल, हाँ कल तो ऑप्शनल प्लान है मुझे, कल नहीं हो पाएगा. But we'll have it next Saturday or Sunday.